This is the tutorial for Chapter 3, Section 3, dealing with scientific notation. And so we've got two different types of problems we're going to encounter today. One type is asking us to write the number in standard notation, which just means just like a regular number, and the other set asks us to write from standard form to scientific notation. So scientific notation is when we have a number, and that number cannot be bigger than 10, but it has to be 1 or larger, and then it's multiplied by a power of 10. And so what we want to do is put it back into the standard form where it's just a regular old number. Well, powers of 10 just move the decimal. So basically this 5 here is going to move the decimal, moves decimal 5 spaces. Now the problem is we've got two ways to move a decimal. We can either move it to the left or to the right. Well, if it's a positive 5, it's going to move it to the right. So moves decimal 5 spaces right is what that's going to end up doing. So basically we've got the number 4, and I don't see a decimal, so it's right at the end of the number, and it's going to move it 5 spaces. So it's going like this: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. These little loops are where the spaces are. So you're just going to fill in placeholders or zeros in place of those spaces. So basically I had to add 5 zeros because I had to move the decimal that many spaces. And that's my answer. So 400,000 would be the number we're looking for. This one's a little bit different because now I have the decimal between the 1 and the 8. So when I go ahead and move the decimal right 8 spaces, I don't have to add 8 zeros because I've got some spaces to move the decimal first. So let me rewrite this part of the number. And again, this number is 1 or bigger, so it works out, so it's in scientific notation. And it moves the decimal 4 spaces before I get to the end of the number. See, 1, 2, 3, 4. So I've moved it 4 spaces, but I've got 4 more spaces I need to go because I've got to go 8 spaces altogether. Well, those extra 4 spaces, I could just add zeros. And so there's my number. So I've got 1, 8, 9, 4, 4, and then I've got those extra 4 zeros I had to add on to make it go 8 spaces altogether. So 189,440,000. So on this one, it only moves it 3 spaces. So I've got 6.41, but when I move the decimal just 2 spaces to get to the end of the number, I only have 1 more space to go. So when I add that extra space, it means I have to add that 0. So 6,410 is that answer. Well, these next few problems, we've got a different situation because we've got a negative exponent. And this time, instead of moving the exponent to the right, it's going to make the number smaller. So basically, the negative exponent says move decimal left, and then I've got 5 spaces in this case. And it's left because it makes the number smaller. It's a fraction of a number. So I've got the 9.06, a 9 600ths, but the decimal is going to move over 5 spaces to the left because it's making it smaller. And so that's 1 space, and now I have 4 more spaces to go. So 1, 2, 3, 4. So I could have just added 4 zeros, and that's what I'll end up having to do to show what that number is. So my number is 0 and then I have to add on those extra 4 zeros there, and the 9, 0, and 6. And there it is. So on this next one, we've got to only move the decimal 2 spaces, but it's got to go left because it's a smaller number. So I go 1 space, and I've got 1 more space to go, so it means I have to add that extra 0, or a placeholder. And that is our answer. And so in this one, you don't see the decimal, but remember, the decimal is always at the end of the number. It's a negative exponent, so it's telling me to move the decimal to the left 4 spaces. So that's 1 space. I got 3 more to go, so that means I have to add those 3 extra zeros in front of the 3 and then put the decimal point. So 0.0003. Well, now the directions say, well, let's go ahead and write it in scientific notation. And again, scientific notation means the first number needs to be 1 or bigger, but smaller than 10. So it's 5.8927. So the decimal point always has to go after the first number, the highest place value. And now we write it as a power of 10. Well, I moved the decimal back 4 spaces to the left. So that means in order to keep the number the same, that means I'd have to have a power of 4. So I could end up moving it back those 4 spaces to the right if I was to write it back into standard notation. So that would be our answer. So this one, same sort of thing. So you're going to rewrite the number, and you're going to use all the significant digits until you hit a row of zeros. See, I've got a row of zeros here. So I don't need to write in those because those aren't significant. They don't mean anything extra. It's not going to change the value of the number. So just the 1.304, and then times by 10. Now, how many spaces did I move that decimal? So I put it right here between the 1 and the 3. So that means I have these 3 numbers, 3 more and 3 more. So that makes a total of 9 spaces I had to move the decimal. So 1.304 times 10 to the 9th power. This one, you have the 6.73, and then times by 10, and we count the spaces that we had to move it over. So we had these 3 zeros here. We had the 7, 3 in the 0, so that makes 3 more spaces, so it's a total of 6 spaces altogether. That would be our answer. And on these problems, they're smaller numbers. So whenever we've got fractions of a number, so a fraction of 1, fraction of a number, I'll say. And so if I've got a fraction of a number, that means we have negative exponents. And so when I'm looking at this, I look at the numbers that would make it a number larger than 1 but smaller than 10. So 5.9 times by 10. Now I've got to count the spaces I need to move the decimal. So it needs to move over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 spaces in order to get it all the way on the other side of the 5. So that means it's going to be times by 10 to the negative 5th because it's a small number. On this one, I got the 4.17 times by 10. Now, I had to only move the decimal 1, 2 spaces to get to the right side of 4, so that means it's at negative 2. And on this one, 6.1, and then I count the spaces. I got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 spaces. So times by 10 to the negative 8th to get that decimal over 8 spaces. So those are the types of problems you're going to see on tonight's homework. Good luck.